Paul Hudrick covers the 76ers. He has for a long time. 97.3 ESPN.com, at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. So the news came out today, Paul, that Joel Embiid will now be out. He was listed as doubtful yesterday, which I guess made you feel like, okay, Chris Paul was doubtful and he ended up playing, and some things, changed from day to day. But he is out. We now know the injury. Are we optimistic that we see Joel Embiid anytime soon when you see day to day with the meniscus tear?
Day to day can mean kind of anything, I guess is what you could say. I don't want to speak in anything that's as far as, and I think anyone that's speaking in like absolutes regarding this is just speaking out of turn. It's when you're talking about a meniscus tear, it depends on a lot of things. It's going to depend on how big the tear is, where the tear is. And then also we're not even 48 hours out from the injury itself. So they still might not even have gotten like the best look at it to know exactly how bad the severity of it. So I just think there's a lot of questions still, but I would say I am optimistic that he will play at some point. When, I don't know, but I do think that I do think the team, I believe it when they say it's going to be rehab. And they're going to have to strengthen the area kind of around that meniscus. And that's how they're going to have to, manage the injury. And it's going to be a lot to do with his pain tolerance as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors. I would say I am optimistic that he will play again in this postseason. How effective he'll be and, how many minutes he'll be able to play and all that, I don't know.
Right.
I don't think anyone does.
And that's the problem. I mean, if you don't get the the Joel Embiid that we've been getting for the first 3 games in 11 minutes of this series, we've seen this play before. I've already watched this act, a welding mask, gastroenteritis. If you're not getting Joel Embiid at his best, that's it, right?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I will say that he is a smarter basketball player than he's been, and I think he's a more determined player than he's ever been. So I think from that regard, I think he can overcome it to an extent. Of course, he's the explosiveness, the dunk that we saw in game 3. Like I wouldn't anticipate a moment like that happening for the rest of the playoffs. But he has really, this year at least, he has become an elite mid-range player.
He has,
and so I think that is going to aid him in a big way. I think the fact that he has become a better passer, that he's become better at
Paul,
dissecting.
you could make the argument that if the other team knows that his whole game is mid-range and he doesn't have that, he has that elongated, ball fake where teams, and then he goes past. If they know that he doesn't have that in him, is he as effective as a player?
Well, no, probably not. But that's not to say he still can't be pretty darn effective. Even just by him being out there, and even if he just plays in the post exclusively.
I'll take a 70% Embiid over the alternative. Right. There's no question. I guess the thought is, if you don't have Embiid at his best, do you have a shot to beat Milwaukee and Brooklyn?
Not as good of one. I don't know. For me, I have to see how he looks before I feel comfortable saying that. I mean, yeah, as we sit here today, it diminishes your chances, certainly, because he was arguably the MVP of the league, and he is not going to be 100% for the rest of this playoff. So, or at least likely not to be 100%. I don't know the full extent, but yeah, it certainly diminishes their chances of being able to beat one of those teams, but you never know. I mean, maybe he comes into this Hawks series, he plays, and maybe he's not the same guy, but he's still pretty darn effective, and the other guys step up around them.
I was going to say,
we'll
are they?
I don't know.
If people just said, "Oh, they had this great path, they beat Washington, they'll probably, tough series against the Hawks," but is it a tough series? If Joel Embiid, let's say he misses 2 weeks, and they start that series without him, can they beat the Hawks a couple games without him?
They might be able to steal a game, especially at home. That's why you fought for home court advantage. That's why, you got the 1 seed was for, not necessarily for this exact moment, but for moments like this where maybe things weren't going your way otherwise, at least you have that home court advantage. So, yeah, I mean, I think, is it possible that they could beat a Hawks team a game or two without Joel Embiid? Yeah, I think they could do it. Them winning an entire series without Joel Embiid, that I don't see. But if he misses a game or two Could they steal one of those two games and perhaps win the rest of the series? Yeah, I think that's very possible. And again, it's still going to depend on how he looks and how the other guys step up, because that's going to matter too.
At Paul Hudrick on Twitter. What do they do in the short term, I guess, tonight without him? Who starts? How's this kind of break down? Because last game they went with Mike Scott for 17 minutes. Do you see Scott go into that role? Does Howard get the start and play more minutes? Do they do 3 guards? Give me some options here, pal.
I think the only wrong answer is to start Mike Scott or Dwight Howard. Ben Simmons should start at the 5 tonight. To me, there's like no question about it. Is Doc Rivers going to do that? I don't know. But to me, I'm starting Ben Simmons at the 5, and I think either of these 3 options are good, Mike. I would love to see Tyrese Maxey get a shot. I think that would give them a lot of energy off the bat. I think the crowd would be really juiced up by seeing him out there. He's clearly a fan favorite. Just the energy he brings against that small lineup with Ben Simmons at the 5, use him and Ben in the pick and roll. I would like to see that personally. And then as the hierarchy goes, Matisse Thybulle, I don't think Matisse Thybulle will be a bad option either, because if you play Ben Simmons at the 5, someone's got to guard Bradley Beal. So Matisse Thybulle, you slot him in pretty nicely there. He takes over guarding Bradley Beal. You move on from there. And then your third option to me would be George Hill. George Hill is kind of, 1, he's the most veteran of those guys. 2, he's the best shooter of those 3. And then the last thing is he can play defense too. So it's not, not to the level of Thybulle, but he's a solid defender. He can kind of just give you an all-around floor game, which would be, very good with Ben Simmons at the 5. To me, it's just the only mistake Doc can make would be to start Mike Scott or Dwight Howard. And I got to be honest with you, Mike, I think he's going to do that. I really think if I had to guess, I would bet that he's going to start Mike Scott and that Ben's and kind of play it that way. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I think you saw in this really all season long, you saw that Mike Scott's not having a good year. He's not been effective in this series. Dwight Howard has not been effective. He's really getting in a lot of, they're not letting him play at all. So his game is almost ineffective. So with this small team that they're up against, I'll just keep saying it. I would start Ben Simmons at the 5. I think to me, that's a no brainer.
All right. Well, and I probably would agree with you, but I'll just ask this then. Playing Ben Simmons at the 5, doesn't that negate some of what makes Ben? His perimeter defense. So are you saying that you need to, because who's going to play, let's say, Gafford in the post, or who's going to play when Lopez comes in? I mean, is Ben Simmons going to defend Lopez now?
Well, my guess would be that. So I think with Gafford, I think he'll be fine, because that's not Gafford's game. Gafford's not a guy who's going to post you up and back you down and muscle you in. That's not his game. His game is to set screens and catch lobs, which actually Ben Simmons is pretty well, pretty capable of doing. I think he'll actually be I actually think he's a better option against Gafford than Dwight Howard as far as defending him.
He's a better option against all those guys, but the problem is they don't have a better option against Beal.
No, but again, if you Matisse Thybulle, then if that's your concern, then you start Matisse Thybulle, and Matisse Thybulle will do, he won't do as good of a job with Ben Simmons, but he'll do a pretty darn good job. He'll do a better job than most guys would do against Bradley Beal in the league. So I think you'd be okay there. And I think offensively, I love the idea of, 1, maybe using Ben more as a screener and a roller, especially if you're going with a smaller lineup with a lot of guards that can handle the basketball. And then 2, you could do the idea of something that I think a lot of people would like to see, and that is Ben Simmons with the ball and 4 shooters surrounding him, and you let Ben go to kind of town and dissect the defense like that. I think that's a viable option too.
Well, we've seen that in the 2017-18 playoffs.
Correct.
That's what they did without Joel. Do they have the same roster to do it? I guess so. You can go Harris and Green and Curry and pick another guy, I guess. And
George Hill.
Yeah, kind of go that route. I said earlier that Brett Brown, I feel like, didn't want to say this is your team or your team. I think he wanted to toe the line, and it was both their teams. I think Doc has said, Joel, this is your team. Ben, we're not going to ask you to score all that much. Just do your thing. Now, don't you have to say, Ben, I know I haven't asked you to score a lot, but I'm going to need you tonight.
I don't know if that's the thought. I look at it like this, because I hear what you're saying, and I do think that is important that Ben Simmons look to score more. I do think that's important, so I want to get that out of the way first. My concern would be And I think you saw it last game when Joel Embiid was out. You saw what I thought Tobias Harris, when Joel Embiid went out, Tobias Harris thought to himself, all right, I got to go. I got to be the guy. And I thought that messed him up. I thought he got out of his game. I thought he did things that he normally doesn't do. He forced stuff. And I think that was as much of his issue as anything that last game. So if I'm Doc Rivers, I think in Ben Simmons' mind, he already knows he has to. And he even admitted that last game. He said that he thought he was perhaps a little passive after Joel Embiid left the game. So I think it's already on Ben Simmons' mind that he knows he has to step up more. So if I'm Doc Rivers, I probably don't want to put more pressure on him and make him think he's got to do everything himself. He already knows. He knows the pressure that he's under. He knows that Joel is out, and he knows what he has to do. So if I'm a Doc, I probably wouldn't go there. And I think, look, there are games where we've seen Ben Simmons do that. I mean, the most glaring one is the game in Utah where he scores, a career high, and he really, for the most part, took that game over. They lost that game ultimately, but the Washington Wizards are not the Utah Jazz.
That is true. Let me ask you this. With Joel Embiid off the floor, you can make an argument that Bradley Beal is now the best player on the floor, correct?
It's from an offensive standpoint, yes. Yeah. He is the best offensive player on the floor easily.
Who's number 2?
Offensively? I mean, probably Tobias Harris, if we're talking. I mean, Tobias Harris or Ben, either one, depends on what you're looking at. As far as a scorer, it's clearly Tobias. Yeah. As far as just an overall, I would say as far as an overall basketball player, it's clearly Ben Simmons.
If you are drafting the rest of these players, Embiid's out, you're saying, all right, I'll take Beal first. Who you taking second?
And then Simmons.
In other words,
I would go Beal, then Simmons, and Harris.
Without Embiid, these two teams become a lot closer, do they not?
Well, sure. I mean, any team that loses its best player, if the Wizards lost Beal, that would be they would be
terrible.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. But I think, and I just think the Sixers are deeper and better. I mean, this, with all due respect, the Wizards have been starting Raul Neto. I mean, and I don't mind Neto. I thought he was fine here, but Neto was like the 10th guy here last year. Like this is what we're talking about. That guy's in the starting lineup for this team.
I feel they win tonight. I feel they win tonight, and everyone's in a panic, and Ben Simmons is this and that. They win tonight, I think, and end this thing. To me, though, there's legit concern that he's not ready to play within 2 weeks here, and that Hawks team is pretty good. And, I mean, even with, like, Capella, it's a different series. They got a guy that can legit defend you. I don't know if they're going to stop you, but you're not scoring 38 against the guy every single night in your sleep.
No, listen, and this is just the reality of the playoffs. I mean, it's just, the deeper you get, the harder it gets. So, this Atlanta team is good. I mean, there's a reason why they're up 3-1 right now. They have Trae Young, who's one of the most dangerous offensive players in the entire league. You talked about Capella, who is a really good rim protector. Really, I'm actually, if I'm worried about something with Joel Embiid going up against Capella, it's actually defensively, because that's the one thing if we've seen throughout with Embiid, if he has trouble with something, it's those pick and roll, those rollers that are lob threats. Those are the guys that he typically has trouble with. So with the banged up knee, that's not going to help his cause. So that I'm concerned about that. And I think defensively in general, it's a tougher matchup. Tobias Harris is probably going to have to go up against DeAndre Hunter, who, with all due respect to Rui Hachimura, DeAndre Hunter's a lot tougher defensively than Rui. So that's going to be a tougher matchup. Ben Simmons is probably going to have a tougher matchup. But I mean, John Collins is not that great of a defensive player. So someone's going to be able to, I think you could attack him, whether it's Tobias or Ben is going to be able to attack him. But yeah, it's no question the Hawks are a better and deeper team, and they have veteran proven players. When you're talking about, Bogdanovich has been around even overseas. He played some big games. Gallinari, you already said Capella, Lou Williams. I mean, they have a good veteran. It's a much deeper and much better roster than this Wizards one. It's no doubt going to be, even with Joel Embiid, a much tougher matchup.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And, look, the Sixers are a team. It's you mentioned, I kind of like it that almost, hey, you take LeBron off the Lakers, you take Giannis off the Bucks, you take that level of player off a team. What do you think that team's chances are going to be? I'm just trying to be real here. I get it. Hey, they got Ben Simmons, they got Tobias Harris. You should be good. No, all these teams have good players, but when you lose a player, I was explaining, like, they lost for a couple of years purposely, yada, yada, not to build a team, Paul, to find that player. They weren't drafting guys to, hey, let's put this guy and he fits with him pretty good. They were drafting to find the best player in the league. That's what they ended up getting with Joel Embiid. The rest of the guys now, okay, they're the other pieces. But when you lose that best player in the league, the reality sets in that your season is probably not going to be where you hoped it was going to be. And I think if he's out for 2 weeks, I think we have to realize that this might not be their year because of that. And that goes back to you have a 7-foot guy who's had some injury issues, and that's the chance you took when you put your eggs in the Embiid basket.
Yeah, and they really had – listen, they had no choice but to do that because of how immensely talented he is and because of everything they did to get him to this point. So, but I mean, like you said, you look up and down, the team, like the Lakers didn't look too good with Anthony Davis last night. The Nets even look when, James Harden missed a bunch of games, or when Kevin Durant missed a bunch of, like they've had, even though they have that star power, you take a guy of that caliber off your team, you're going to suffer. There's no two ways about it. And yeah, like, as much as do I think they have, so let's say, Mike, like theoretically, Embiid's out for 2 weeks. So we'll include this week and next week. That means he's missing at least, 2 games in the Atlanta series? Yes. Could they win one of those games? Absolutely. But they could definitely lose both of those games without Joel Embiid, at home or not. So you're right. That's the reality that people have to face is that when, again, like look at it from Atlanta's standpoint, you take Trae Young off that team, they're almost the Wizards. Like they're just not that good. You take a guy like that out of the mix and it just completely changes. And on top of that, Mike, like with Joel Embiid, everything revolves around him. Just like everything revolves around, Bradley Beal, everything revolves around Trae Young. It's just the way it goes. Yep. So when you take that out of lineup, everyone has to adjust and everything changes. So yeah, I mean, if he's out 2 weeks and he can't play like the first couple of games of Atlanta, they're going to be in trouble.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Best case scenario, I guess, Paul, would be that Atlanta, New York goes 7. That would be on Sunday. And then that series wraps up and you probably start Tuesday or Wednesday night. And quite frankly, I don't know that he's ready to go Tuesday or Wednesday night. Give me a quick thought on what happened in Boston today.
I don't know, man. It's weird. I mean, the Danny Ainge thing, if I'm being honest, like Danny Ainge has had obviously a lot of success. He's done a lot of good things with the Celtics. I thought he had a terrible offseason. Granted, they had injuries and everything and all that piled up, but you didn't have a big man and you signed Tristan Thompson, and you gave him, pretty good money. I just, you lost Gordon Hayward and you didn't really replace him. I don't know. I kind of saw this coming because I just didn't think.
Yeah, but how about moving Stevens to that role? Like, okay, are you now because Stevens has had this reputation that he's this great coach, and the Sixers Celtics thing is, well, they got him and they keep beating you because you keep getting out coached. Which, okay, are you now saying that the executive role is now more important than the on-court coach? Is that what they're saying here?
It's so bizarre to me because it said, the reports are he got burnt out on coaching. So then the move is to become a general manager and run an entire franchise. Like, I don't know how that's any less stressful or how that doesn't burn you out even more. There are other reports that perhaps he lost the locker room. So now you're going to be the general manager of a team who you lost in the locker room. Like, it's just a bizarre thing. And the other thing too, Mike, I don't doubt that, Brad Stevens is a really smart dude. And I don't doubt that at some point he might be able to figure this out, but to just give him the job, not interview anybody. Like, think of all the good, you could have, I know one day that was sort of talk to Oklahoma City and try to pram away Sam Presti.
Yeah. How long does it take before he hires a coach who's not as good as he, and he puts himself back in the coaching role?
Just Pat Riley's it up. You never know. That might happen. Absolutely.
At Paul Hudrick tonight, he will be at the Wells Fargo Center for a full sellout crowd. Sixers-Wizards Game 5, and you can hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Paul, we'll talk to you, pal.
Sounds good, Mike. Take care, man.
All right, and he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Good stuff from Paul, as always. Get all of his Sixers coverage at 97.3ESPN.com.